Hey, what's up, YouTube cannabis cultivators? You have just tuned in. My name's Hank, aka CALIGREEN. So the last video I did like this was pretty popular. I got a lot of views, and I wasn't planning on doing another video like this, but I got a pretty good question, and the question was about humidity and how to control it and the equipment to use to control it and things like that. So I think I want to talk about that and get into pretty good detail. But before we start, I think what we have to talk about is why humidity is so important. Well, for one, it prevents disease, mold issues, and things like that. But the other reason is because everything that happens with your plant happens because of the humidity. Well, not everything, but a large part of it. You see, humidity is the amount of moisture that the air can hold, right? And the crazy thing about plants is that they can sense how much moisture is in the air around their leaves. And the leaves, they have these little holes, they're called stomata. And when there's a lot of humidity, it closes up these stomata, so it doesn't release any more humidity. There's enough humidity outside, it's not going to try to balance itself out, it's just going to close the stomata out. But when there's not a lot of humidity, it opens these stomata out. And what that does is it allows the plant to release moisture and also gases like oxygen and shit. But the reason why that's important is because it has to pull this water from somewhere, right? And where it pulls it from is the root system. So it's a whole chain of things that are happening. The stomata is opening up and it's allowing moisture to be absorbed through the root system, go through the plant, and eventually through all the processes that happen, it's released in the form of moisture or gases. The most important part of that process is photosynthesis, right? But you're not only absorbing water, you're also absorbing all the nutrients that are in the soil. So that's how humidity plays a major role in the health of your plant. But everything happens inside of the plant because of moisture. Let's talk about photosynthesis. We have to talk about it. I guess I didn't really want to, but we have to. Photosynthesis is a process in which your plant takes oxygen and hydrogen and uses the energy from the light to break up these molecules and recombine them into carbohydrates. You know what I'm saying? So, and then the waste from that is oxygen. You know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of shit going on because of this whole process of water moving from the root system up towards the plant and out through the stomata. I mean, if it's not moving, there's not going to be any water for that process to happen. So yeah, it's a big deal. So me personally, I grow in this grow tent right here. It just makes things a lot easier to grow in a space like this because you're able to control the environment a lot easier. And there's a few pieces of equipment that can help you control that humidity. And I guess the first place we're going to start is just the circulation fan. And I know a lot of people don't talk about the circulation fan as being a piece of equipment that helps you with humidity, but it does. The way that it works is that, if you have stagnated air, you could have pockets of stagnated humidity inside your tent underneath leaves in the canopy, you know what I mean? And the fan actually moves all that air around so there's not stagnated pockets of humidity in your room. So that's step number one. There's of course other benefits to having circulation in your fan, but I'm not going to touch on that today because I'm sure everybody else has talked about that, how it makes the leaves stronger, stems and leaves stronger and things like that. But that's not what this video is about, so I'm not really going to touch on that. Let me backtrack. So the environment that you're in is important because it pretty much dictates what the environment inside your room is going to be. So to give you an example, if you live, let's say Southern California, because that's where I live, right? In LA, it's super dry. I mean, most of the year we're dealing with humidity around 30%, unless you know, there's rainstorms and things like that, which doesn't happen too often. So a lot of my energy is on maintaining or bringing up the humidity. Whereas if you were to live somewhere else, like in Florida, right? Florida may have higher humidity. So you may want to invest more into dehumidifying your room. But that's really important. Where you're at in the world and what the conditions are, where you're at makes a big difference. All right, let's get back to it then. Yeah, I got sidetracked, but it was an important part, I think. Yeah, so you got your fan. You're also going to need, depending on where you are, let's start with dehumidification, right? In order to dehumidify a room, there's a few different routes you can take, or you can use all these pieces of equipment. But number one is going to be an exhaust fan, and that's like the least expensive too, right? So depending on where you are in the world, you know, if you use an exhaust fan, you can actually draw out the moisture from inside of the tent and expel it out and then keep the humidity low. But the only way this is going to work is if somehow if that exhaust is pulling in drier air, or you're pumping in drier air. If your tent is in an environment where it's humid and you're using the exhaust to draw out the air from inside your grow space, but you're drawing in humid air as well, it's not going to do anything. This room where the tent is in is my lung room, because I keep this room at a certain temperature and environment. And when I use my exhaust, right, it pulls air out of the tent, and that creates a suction that sucks in air from this room. And it works for me because, like I said, I live in a very dry place, and I know that this room is always going to be dry, and it's easy to keep it dry, right? Because I'm in LA. But if you live in a place where it's humid and your room is humid, and you exhaust that air and create suction and pull in more air from the lung room, it's going to be just as humid. So it may not make a major improvement. It might improve it some, because the plant itself is creating moisture inside that small space due to transpiration, right? But it's not gonna, if you're in a humid environment to begin with, or a humid lung room, you're not going to be able to bring it down to the level that you need it to be brought down, because your lung room is always going to be at that level. In a situation where the exhaust fan is not going to cut it, you're probably going to need a dehumidifier to bring the moisture down inside your room. And the thing about dehumidifiers is that they also heat up the room. So you got to know about that too, because for every action, there's going to be a counter force reaction. And that's every piece of equipment. We'll get to every piece of equipment, but for the dehumidifiers, it's always going to raise the temperature inside that tent. But a dehumidifier is very similar to an AC unit, right? It's got condensation coils and things like that, and there's got a high side, like a hot side, and a cold side, and water condenses on the coils, and it has to create that heat and that cold. So that's the reason why it's heating up the room. And depending on the size of your room, you may need something that's a 20 pint, you might need something that's a 30 pint. I personally use the 20 pint because I've grown in larger rooms, and it's able to dry big 4x8 rooms, and I never know, in the future I might grow in a 4x8 again, but it'll dry a room like this super quick. So there's energy savings behind that. If it comes on really quick and dries your room down really quick, then it saves me electricity. So buying the more expensive one or the bigger one up front can save you electricity in the future. So the dehumidifier will take care of the humidity. It might raise the temperature inside the room, but you also got an exhaust, and exhaust is a must. So no matter if you have a humidity issue or you don't, you're always going to have an exhaust fan. So they're going to work in combination. The thing is, now you're dealing with a unit that's heating up your room. You got the exhaust that's sucking out that air, right? And depending on what the environment is in your lung room, you might be in another battle, because your humidifier may be drying your room, but then the exhaust is sucking in, you know, warm, humid air, and then you got another issue there. So it's going to be constantly going and fighting the humidity. These are all things you have to think about. And the way that I deal with that is by keeping this room or the lung room at a temperature and humidity that I need it to be in. But then again, there's more energy involved, right? There's more electricity involved, because now I'm not only managing that room, but I'm also managing this room. And I also got all my computer and camera equipment in here, and it's not good to have high levels of humidity inside this room. It's probably not good for your home either, you know, so I keep it at a moderate level. And another form of dehumidification is your AC, because your AC creates cold, dry air. It'll dry up your room really quickly. So it has the benefit of both cooling down your room and also drying out your room. The thing about ACs though is that they also create heat, a lot of heat, and you got to exhaust that out, not only out of your lung room, but also make sure it doesn't go into your growing room, because then you're battling yourself, right? It's going to be, you're going to be cooling down, but at the same time you're going to be heating it up, so it's going to be constantly battling itself. And my shit is rigged up, dude. Like I needed to figure out a way to do it. I couldn't put a portable AC in the window, so I had to figure out a way to do it. And the way I did it is I got these portable ACs, and I broke off the grills, and I stuffed duct into the you know, the fan, the cold air side of it, and duct that into the tent, and then the hot side I wrapped it in towels and shit. They have insulated duct, by the way, but maybe I should invest in some of that. But I just wrapped it in fucking towels and tape, and then I ran that out my window, so it doesn't really, it's insulated. You can still feel the heat, and not as hot as it would be if it wasn't insulated. Wait a minute. I just remembered I did buy that insulated duct. I changed it out. And those are the options that I know for dehumidification. But when it comes to humidification, you have a few different options as well. Number one would be just a bucket of water inside the room. Sometimes can help bring the humidity up. Another thing, which I don't recommend, by the way, is less circulation. Like if you don't exhaust that room as much, the humidity is going to build up because that plant is transpiring. So maybe trying to figure out a way to use the transpiration to your advantage, right? Where you're still exhausting, but maybe setting it to a level where you're able to exhaust the air, but still maintain some sort of humidity in the room. So, you know, another way to bring up the humidity in your room is through periodic foliar spraying. But you got to be all over that. I don't know. I don't got time for it. You might have time for it, but I don't got time for that, man. But the sure way of doing it is through humidifiers. And there's a few different types of humidifiers that are available out there. So, you know, the first one's going to be your regular warm air humidifier. And the way that these work is they have like a heating element that pretty much creates the water in the reservoir into a steam. And that creates the humidity for the room. The other one is a cold humidifier. I think there's a few different types, but the only one that I really know about, because I own one, is the one that has the ultrasonic kind of device in it, and it vibrates the water at such a high temperature that it turns to freaking humidity or whatever. It turns to vapor. And the one that I have anyway, it doesn't seem to be good for growing plants. It's good for growing mushrooms and things. It creates a whole lot of humidity, but the thing about it is, like, the humidity is kind of heavy. It sits at the bottom. It's visible too, which is a trip, right? But it sort of sits at the bottom and kind of fills up the room as it goes. Whereas the steam humidifiers sort of rise to the top and then fill it from there. Both of them have disadvantages, by the way. Main disadvantage is if you're running this thing constantly, you can get condensation on the walls of your grow room. And that's a pain, dude, because it gets all over your equipment too, like your lights and your fans. But when it gets on the sidewalls, it starts to drip down the walls and it creates puddles at the bottom, and that's never any good. You know, you're trying to avoid mold situation when it comes to these types of plants, and having moisture puddled at the bottom or you know, in beads on the side of the wall, it's not good. Now, a lot of these humidifiers, they have these sensors that come along with them, and they're kind of like sensors and controllers. I don't trust them too much. They've never worked that great in my experience. So I usually I have a separate controller to control both my humidifiers and my dehumidifiers, because both of them may come with controllers and they're not always the best. Now, you may want to use all this equipment in your room, but just know that whenever you have all this equipment set on controllers, they're always going to be battling each other. You're always going to have pieces of equipment that are going to fight against each other. It's about dialing it all in. And I think you can get pretty close to dialing things in where they're not constantly fighting each other. I don't think you can 100% eliminate it, but you can definitely get a sweet spot where it's not using so much energy, right? All right, so hopefully you understood what I was talking about. I know I kind of just babbled and shit, but you know, I don't know, whatever. But you know, I guess what we can do is we can talk about my setup, and I'll show you how everything's working. My shit's rigged up, dude. When I tell you it's rigged up, it's fucking rigged up. It's probably not the best way. It works, but it could be better. Yeah, I know my setup's not the best, but it works good for me. So I'm in a 39 by 39 grow tent, and that's not a very common size. As a matter of fact, I think the only company that makes them is MarsHydro. But I really like the size because I feel like 48 by 48 is too big. I have a 6-inch exhaust fan, and I think I know it's a little bit too big, but it works good for me because I can throttle it. I can speed it up and completely exhaust a room within seconds, or I can slow it down to where you can barely even hear it. This exhaust fan's pulling out all the hot air that settles at the top of the tent. It's also removing humidity built up from transpiration. Because my neighbors are so nosy, I have a carbon filter hooked up to this. It removes about 90% of odors. But there's some really important details about the size of the filter and the quality. I just don't have time to speak about it today. I also have an intake fan, and this fan is pulling air from outside of the house. And in the winter, it's a lot colder. So I not only use it to introduce fresh air, but also to cool down the room. The thing is, I can't have this fan running all the time, or else the room would be too cold. And this is where it starts to get complicated. You see, I have two controllers for this intake fan. The first controller senses the outdoor temperature, where the air is being pulled in from. The outside temperature has to be at least 15 degrees cooler for it to have any kind of effect on the grow room. So if it's within that range, it turns on the second controller. Now the second controller has a sensor inside the tent. If the room is too warm, it will turn on the intake fan. But this can only happen if the first controller turns on, because what I don't want to do is pull in warmer air from outside, and that's what the first controller prevents. Now, if for some reason it's too warm outside, or the room's not cooling down fast enough, the AC comes on. I'm using an old controller called the autopilot to turn on and off the AC. The autopilot also has a sensor inside the tent. It's set to a higher temperature. This ensures that I'm never going to reach those extreme temperatures that can cause damage to my plant. Because I live in Southern California, I don't deal with dehumidification too much. I'm mostly trying to bring up the humidity in the vegetative stage. I use the warm air humidifier. This is also connected to the autopilot. The autopilot has the ability to either increase or decrease humidity. It can't do both. So that means you can only connect one device at a time. I usually put the humidifier inside the grow room. I also try to slow down the exhaust when I use the humidifier, just to keep in the humidity a little longer. The key here is trying to keep balance between temperature and humidity. I usually run temperatures a little warmer in veg anyway, so it works out. The only time I find myself using a dehumidifier is during the flowering stage, and I usually put that outside the room. The problem with that is that it constantly runs in order to keep that humidity low. I found that I have to set it down to 40 or 35%. So anytime I can put it inside the tent, I do. The upside is, because it's a smaller space, it doesn't run as much and I can set that humidity higher to 50%, which saves me electricity. So yeah, my shit's rigged up, dude, but it works. And although the equipment do fight each other every once in a while, it's not that bad. It's minimal. All right, guys, that's all I got for you today. I want to thank you for watching, commenting, and subscribing. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Don't forget to check out the links in the description section of this video. Follow me on Instagram. Check out my Patreon. Check out all the links in the description section of this video. And if you like this video, click like. Peace.